What's up, people? I'm Shaggy, the Opinionated Hippie, and this is part two of my deep dive into a never explored band, the Moody Blues. I saw them on two lists, the 25 best British rock bands, 25 best prog rock bands, and they were on both lists, and I've never heard a single Moody Blues album in its entirety till a couple days ago when I started listening to them in order. I did a video for their first album. I'm now on their second album, Days of Future Past. This came out in 1967. This has two of the songs that I was familiar with, Tuesday Afternoon and Nights in White Satin. Though if you look on the actual track list, you don't see those titles because they're buried within other songs. I knew there was orchestra on this album prior to listening to it because I had heard Nights in White Satin, and there's an orchestral part and a spoken word part when they play it, even on the radio. And so I kind of don't know how I feel about this album, to be perfectly honest. There is an orchestral element pretty much unlike other orchestral rock bands I've heard. The orchestra is like fully committed at times. And then it's almost like we'll get like almost every song is either all orchestral, like in the case of the first one, or you get like an orchestral opening and then like an actual like psych pop, slightly prog song, and then more orchestral stuff, or you get a song with an orchestral interlude, or either way, there's some like orchestral element that's like an actual song. And my issue with this album is I've only heard it a couple times, but the orchestra stuff reminds me, at times it reminds me of Fantasia, Disney's Fantasia movie, like The Dawn is a Feeling. I think it's either, there's a song called Dawn is a Feeling and another song called The Morning. This album is literally the Beatles, A Day in the Life, turned into an album. We go from The Day Begins is the opening track to The Night is the closing track. This is a day. And a lot of the orchestral stuff sounds like a Fantasia soundtrack of the day. I think it's the first one. Maybe I think it's The Day Begins, or maybe it's The Morning After. Yeah, it's The Morning, Another Morning, which reminds me of Bambi. Like, it reminds me of that scene in Bambi when we first meet all the animals and Thumper comes out, and I think Flower, the skunk, pokes her head out, and like it's like whimsical, and you can see butterflies flying around. The orchestral stuff at times reminds me of like a Disney movie. There are times it reminds me of like a Looney Tunes cartoon, which is not an insult because Looney Tunes did a great job using classical music. But there's a song, Lunch Break, Peak Hour, in which there's like this big swelling, chaotic, like, oh, traffic, it's a city, it's bustling type orchestral music. And I could see an animated cartoon to this. Like it visually conjures up very appropriate images to the songs, but it still sounds a little just too, I'm not sure it's something I want to listen to apart from like watching it on like Fantasia or a Looney Tunes. There's a couple other moments when it sounds almost like 40s-esque type MGM type movies. So I'm torn on this album because the orchestral stuff, at least for the first half of the album in particular, I'm not sure how much I like it. The second half, I think I like it a little better, but only because by the time we get to the second half of the album and we get to a little more of the actual songs that are like kind of nestled within the orchestral stuff, it's almost like there's this museum across the street from the school I teach at that has like a big sand pit. There's always like dinosaur bones in there. It's like the orchestral stuff is the sand pit, and finding these awesome bones are these incredible pop songs that are buried within the album. Tuesday Afternoon, one of the songs I had known already. It's pretty much the start of a song called The Afternoon, which opens up side two. It's officially called Forever Afternoon, parentheses Tuesday, but I think maybe the single version was actually called Tuesday Afternoon, or at least when I heard it on the radio, they always said, that's Tuesday Afternoon by the Moody Blues. Tuesday Afternoon is one of the greatest psych pop songs ever. It is just absolutely amazing. It sounds incredible. They didn't have the vinyl at my library, but I was able to find like a CD copy of this at the library, so I was able to listen to it in pretty decent sound quality. It is just an awesomely arranged song. The vocals are fantastic. This is the first album. Denny Lane, I know who was on the first one, is gone, and Justin Hayward, who I believe stays with him for quite a while, has taken over on this album. I think those are the only changes. Again, I know nothing about Moody Blues other than these albums, other than I do know, I think Denny Lane was only on the first one. But the everything about Forever Tuesday Afternoon it's perfect. It even has like the Beatles influences here, I think, in that you can hear like they heard Sgt. Pepper's and they're like, hey, you can put a song within another song, like in Day in the Life, because Tuesday Afternoon has this sort of Western wagon, doon, 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 like piano Western motif, different song in the middle. It's like a Tim Conway Disney movie, like the Apple Dumpling Gang from the 70s. This is the kind of music that would play when Tim Conway and Don Knotts show up for the first time, but it's in the middle of Tuesday Afternoon, and then they go back into like the first part. Tuesday Afternoon is an incredibly perfect song. The other song I knew on here, Nights in White Satin, that is a direct beeline, a direct line to King Crimson's In the Court of the Crimson King. The title track on that album, Epitaph on that album, like Nights in White Satin is the template for what would happen. It's got that big prog sound in it, big prog ballady sound. But other than those two things are fantastic, but then the afternoon song, the second half of that has this nice little ballady part of it in which the energy kind of builds and builds and builds and then just becomes freer because the evening is coming and so work is over. So as the lyrics describe, like the end of the day, the freedom of the music kind of like lives that out. I think they do it really well musically, like as a band, but when it comes to the orchestral stuff, it's a little maybe too cheesy at times for me. The evening song, awesome. There's, I think, two different songs buried in this, both the Sunset, which has this really kind of funky, cool psych pop sound to it, is the first part. And then there's another part called Twilight Time, which is just kind of ominous and reminds me of the Dukes of Stratosphere's 25 o'clock. Like, we don't get to that 25 o'clock big chorus, but the energy that leads up to that kind of creepy psych energy that leads up to that big chorus on the Duke song reminds me of the energy in this Twilight Time song. The psych pop writing is fantastic. Like, I'm listening to this going, I really wish there was a version of this that was like, didn't have the orchestral stuff, but then was padded out to replace the orchestral stuff with other sort of psych pop songs, because their psych pop songs are like home runs every time. And they're really bringing a little bit of a different energy, and they're really creative, and they're definitely trippy. Like, this is a trippy band. Like, in my first video, I said, I'm pretty sure I've heard one of these albums before, because in college, we went to a lot of like house parties, and this was Berkeley, you know, people were having a good time and music was always on. I'm almost positive that this album, or maybe another Moody Blues album, was on, because this is some trippy stuff. This is some, like, I know they're a prog rock band. This is some great psychedelic music. Like, the Moody Blues are nailing the late 60s vibe here. The afternoon, fantastic. Evening, fantastic. The song The Night is when we get Nights in White Satin. And then we get that spoken narration part. And then at the very end of the song, I'll talk about the first half of the album in a while. But at the very end of the song, there's you get a gong, bong, like the day is over. And then the gong kind of lingers for like 20, 25 seconds. Have to compare it to that last note in Sgt. Pepper's Day in the Life. Like, I think there's something here in this. It's like, yeah, they were aware of Sgt. Pepper's. Sgt. Pepper's came out earlier that year, right? This came out, they started to record this in May. I honestly don't know. I think Sgt. Pepper's came out in June of that year, right? I'm gonna look that up because to me, that's part of my whole, Sgt. Pepper's came out in May. So they started recording this right when Sgt. Pepper's was released. And you can hear that influence. You can hear like they saw I have to imagine they saw what the Beatles were doing and were like, let's do that, but in our own way. But the second half of the album, the afternoon, evening, and the night, that's like almost a home run. I'm even able to like overlook the orchestral stuff because the songs, the rock psych pop songs, are so incredible they kind of allow a little more leeway for me to enjoy the orchestral stuff. The first half of the album I'm not as into. The Day Begins, the opening track, I think is almost 100% instrumental. You have themes that occur from the album. Probably the best part of the opening part is when the Knights in White Satin theme pops up. A nice connection between the beginning and the end of the album. The narration is very 60s poetry, psych stuff. Shout out to Brave Helios, who is going to join us. But the first 5 minutes, all orchestra. Then we get the next song. It's called Dawn. Dawn is a feeling. This is a kind of a ballady type song, as you would start your day, kind of slow, but there's force behind it. There's a little bit of energy, almost a Sinatra type, crooning type thing. The lyrics are very psyche and trippy, and your mind open your. It's very be here now type vibe in these lyrics. I could see why in '67, even as the Summer of Love, like this came out in November of '67, right? So I think the Summer of Love was dying by then, and the dream had not been achieved, and we're starting to get to the darker days of '68 and '69, especially here in the States. And I would imagine this coming out in November, people latching onto this and be like, yeah, this is what we're about. We need more of this. I just wish it wasn't all with orchestral stuff. So you get the Dawn is a feeling. You get a song called The Morning, which has that Bambi-esque type stuff. And then when the band comes in, it's a nice, playful, very cheerful sort of English pop psych stuff. I think there's a flute or a piccolo or some very whimsical type woodwind comes in. And then the most chaotic thing in the first half of this album is Lunch Break, which sounds like a traffic scene, an animated traffic scene. And then when the band comes in, we get more really bright, upbeat psych pop, just really prototypical 60s psych pop energy. It's just absolutely fantastic stuff. A little Beatlesque, but trippier than the Beatles ever were. I think the Beatles purposefully did, Strawberry Fields, Walrus, they had that purposely trippy era. The trippiness seems a little more part of the DNA of the Moody Blues. I don't know if this is going to maintain itself going forward, but sort of that psych indulgence seems a little more prominent. But I really, really enjoyed listening to this album, even though I definitely have my reservations about the orchestral stuff, and I wish there was a version, which it wasn't there. I think, to me, sitting through the beginning is the roughest part because it is almost all orchestral. It is very cinematic. I'm not one that even listens to soundtracks very much as far as instrumental soundtrack music. So that's nothing. I don't even listen to classical music. All the classical music I was gravitated towards. It's Stravinsky because of Zappa, and even before Zappa. At Varese, things that are more difficult, not traditional classical music. I also really like Peter and the Wolf, because we do a unit on that in my kindergarten class every year, which is fantastic. But I don't listen to much classical music. And this it's a little too big and grand and, I don't know, slightly cheesy for my taste. But the songs, the pop songs, the psych pop songs, what this band is doing as a rock band, it's some absolutely amazing stuff. And Tuesday Afternoon, that song is that's an almost perfect song. But yeah, I've listened to 2 albums so far. This one obviously is number 1 compared to the first one, which I didn't think the first one was bad. I felt they were going to go in a different direction. I wasn't expecting this much of a saturation of the orchestra. I thought it would be maybe a little more balanced. At times, I think it's fantastic. The second half of the album, I do think the first half of the album is not as much to my liking as the second half. But yeah, I'm excited. I'm really looking forward to see what the next one has to offer. Yeah, that's it. So that's it. So yeah, let me know your thoughts on this album, what you think about this album, anything I might need to know that I don't know about. I'm pretty much I found a discography. I'm just going album by album. I'm trying not to read anything about them or learn anything about them. I am looking to see who's in the band. I did notice Denny Lane is not in this one, and Justin Hayward has joined the band. So I think that's, I don't know. I think Hayward was in there in the 80s for that song that I knew too, but I don't know. But anyways, yeah, really excited to get on to album number 3 to see what that's like. Thanks for watching. Yeah, let me know anything you want to share about Moody Blues. So far, 2 albums in. This has been a fun little journey. But that's all I got. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, like, share, comment. Do those things. And peace. Talk to you later.